Okay, the video just isn't quite done yet. It started, so just give me a second.
Everyone just take a moment to log in. And I'll just start by looking to see if there's any disclosures of pecuniary interest.
The video hasn't started yet.
Oh, let's just wait until the SIRE video is up and rolling. Okay, so I'll just look to see if there's any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Don't see any. That brings us to the consent items. Colleagues, are there any items in here that you'd like to pull to be discussed separately? Councillor Hopkins and then Councillor Van Holst.
Yes, I just have, I guess number 3 and 11, 2 questions on that.
Councillor Van Holst.
I'll just move to the outside of Councillor Hopkins with 12 and 6.
Councillor Morgan.
I will add, I want to make a comment on 5. I don't think it needs to be pulled. It'll be brief. 6 has been pulled, so 7, 8, I have a comment on 12 and a comment on 13, but we can do them separate if you think so, Chair.
Councillor Cassidy.
4 and 9, please.
Any last thoughts on any of these colleagues where you want to pull them? I have some comments on 4, but it's not going to influence how I'm voting on it, so I will leave it in the consent. So let's move 2, 4, 5, 10, 14, 15, 16. Except for 4. Thanks, Councillor Cassidy. That's great. 2, 5, 10, 14, 15, 16. Okay, that's up. If we could have a mover and a seconder, then we'll take any comments on those items. Go ahead, colleagues. Councillor Morgan.
Just a comment on 5, amendments to the traffic and parking bylaw. It's always a mishmash of changes. The one thing that I thought was important to continue to highlight is some of the changes that we're making to school zones and the introductions of some school zone speed limit reductions. In this particular case, there's a couple in my ward. I think that these will be great changes and certainly something that I know that we'll study and analyze and see the effectiveness of. But I think staff has done a good job of implementing this over a period that is reasonable, so that we can take it one step at a time. So I was happy to see those changes.
Any other comments on 5, 10, 14, 15, or 16? Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you. I was speaking to a representative from Green Shields earlier today. They're pleased at how things are moving along with that. So, and I think that's exciting that we're going to be getting and attempting a new technology for. So, looking forward to seeing that happen in the future.
I don't see any more comments, so let's open the voting.
Closing. Closing the vote. Motion passed. Whoops. Sorry, Matt isn't in. Sorry, I won't close it. Oops. I just, I don't know if I can go back. Yeah. He wasn't signed in. Yeah. We'll do it.
Okay, that brings us to item number 2. Nope, item number 3. Staff report, Wonderland Road South improvements, pulled by Councillor Hopkins. Go ahead.
Thank you, and through the chair to staff, I'm just really pleased to see this coming forward. I know there's been concerns of, because of the increase in traffic volumes on Wonderland, there's been a concern in the community of the safety of the road, so really pleased to support this. I would like, I understand it's coming forward in 2017 with work to be completed in 2018. Are the timelines, could you give more advice on the timelines? Is it the spring of 2017 that things are going to get started, or is that still to be determined?
Thank you, through the chair. The timelines are as pretty much as what you've discussed at this point in time. We anticipate that design will be taking place, over the winter period and spring, and that spring will commence in 2017 with completion. Usually we do. Well, I'm not sure for this case for certain, but typically we do the top coat on the year following when we do the base coat. In this case, I'm sure that will likely happen because we're rebuilding most of the base. So I suspect that we'll be finishing up in 2018.
And if I may, through the chair again to staff, are the work I understand is from Manning going south. What about on Wonderland to the north of Manning? Are there, what are the plans for Wonderland there?
Thank you, through the chair to the councillor. That's a separate project from this, but it is being completed currently. The detailed designs being finished off, and we anticipate releasing that tender for next year. So that work will get done in parallel.
Councillor Morgan and then Councillor Van Holst.
Yes, my question relates to the traffic volumes. So obviously, seems like a good project. I know that volume was listed a number of times, including the increased volume since the connection's been made to the 401. So we've done a study on those volumes, and they showed that significant increase.
Thank you, through the chair to the councillor. We did a count post opening of the new interchange there, and that was back in March. So it's probably grown since then as well. Wonderland Road's up to about 2,500 vehicles per day. So it's about, I would say, maybe 3 times the volume that was in that area previously.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and through you. To staff, a question about maybe conduit or fiber that might be placed along this corridor. I was at the Smart and Connected Communities Forum in Toronto on Friday, and in rural areas, it's a huge concern that they've got adequate internet connections, and of course the SWIFT program is going on around the province in rural areas, and I'm wondering, because this is a little bit rural, if one, we're eligible to participate in that program, and or two, if we plan to put that kind of connectivity in, put in some fiber, or at the very least lay some conduit so that can be put in the future.
Through the chair, the section of roadway that we're reinstating there is principally there to carry traffic. There hasn't been any not effort, but certainly there hasn't been any anticipation that we'd be installing fiber on that line, as far as I'm aware at this point in time. So it's not going to be complete with fiber. It is a very low populated area. I think at this point in time, we have only about a half a dozen houses on that entire section of roadway. So I don't think at this point it would be installed. If we were to do it at a later date, it would probably be with the need and anticipating the, the traffic volume on the fiber, if that will. And it would be installed probably as a trenchless style of installation, and probably off on the boulevard side. So we'll wait until the need is there for us to move forward with it. But in the simplest way, for this particular section of roadway, we have not anticipated the installation of fiber.
Okay, thank you. That's fine. It's the province goal to eventually have every house connected. So we'll do it at that time.
Okay, I don't see any other comments on item number 3. The staff recommendation is there before us. Is there a mover and a seconder? Any other discussion? Seeing none, let's open the voting.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed 6-0.
That brings us to item number 4, which is the staff report on Southwest Ontario's public transportation opportunities. Please is pulled by Councillor Cassidy. Go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just have a quick question, really. When it talks about some of the ideas and plans going forward, if we adapt this, or if we adopt this ourselves, it talks about multimodal terminals and other things like that. And I know that we had some of these already in place in a lot of our plans, like our downtown plan, our London plan, the shift. And I'm wondering how many changes or how we might have to adapt those plans to fit in with this, if it would require anything major, or if it's something that we can do pretty seamlessly.
Thank you, through the chair. You're absolutely correct. The Transportation Master Plan was designed as a multimodal plan, of course, starting with the walking and moving to cycling and other modes of transportation, including transit, which was a huge component of it. We'll have to do some adaptability with respect to the inter-community aspects of the requirement. There's no doubt about that, and we've begun that process already, having meetings with some of the servers and of course trying to modify the inter-community busing regulations that are in place at this point in time. I think that I'd prefer to turn it over to Mr. Soldo to speak further on that if there's much to add.
Through the chair to the councillor, we've always kept this approach in mind when we've been designing shift, particularly at the transit villages. So our goals and aspirations very much do align with all of the elements within the toolbox that's been identified here.
Thank you. I just want to comment and say that this is a fabulous plan coming from the southwestern Ontario region. Sarnia, smaller place. London was always the hub and the place to come to, and as it mentioned in the report, some of the access has fallen away because of things that have taken place, and so private operators there aren't as many now as there used to be. So I think this is great. It's a way to allow people to remain in their communities and yet come to London for the services that we offer. So this is great. Awesome. Thank you.
Mayor Brown.
Thanks very much, Chair. I wanted to just speak briefly about Councillor Zafman and the work that he did on this early on in the term, and he reached out to a number of communities right across the Southwest and made this one of his missions. We also know that this is right in the Minister's mandate letter to focus in this area, and it's critical for our growth as Southwestern Ontario. I want to remind the committee that the group of the 11 urban centres, MOSO, that the mayors of Southwestern Ontario have endorsed moving in this direction, as have the Western Wardens, and that represents 2.5 million people in Southwestern Ontario. It's critically important that we have their support for initiatives like this, and that we support initiatives like this, because they have signed on to initiatives like high-speed rail and supportive of high-speed rail, even though it doesn't touch their community. Because we need to make those strong connections so we can have seamless transition, whether you're traveling from a smaller community in Southwestern Ontario to London, hop on our Shift Rapid Transit, find your way downtown, hop on the high-speed rail to get to Toronto in 90 minutes. All of this, I think, is reflective of the spirit of the region right now, and also very reflective of what we identified in our strategic plan as a direction to go, really to become the hub for Southwestern Ontario. This is the sort of thing that will get us there. And so thanks to Councillor Zafman for his leadership on this early on in the term, and I know I'll be happy to give him a call tomorrow to let him know that the committee has approved this.
Any other speakers on this item? Councillor Van Holst, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And as I look up from my papers, I noticed that our new city engineer, Kelly Schur, is here, and wanted to offer my welcome. And you'll be also most welcome to help us on these new transportation projects, which are certainly going to be exciting and move the city forward. So thanks for that opportunity.
Thank you. I don't see any other comments, colleagues, so if you'll indulge me from the chair, I'm delighted to see this come forward. I think that the mayor has spoken very well about the value of working with our regional neighbors to advance a common agenda when it comes to regional mobility and transportation options. I think we see that the areas of Canada that work together the best are doing the best in terms of getting capital infrastructure funding and putting it together. There's a lot of progress been made in the GTA, for example, and you see similar progress happening in Vancouver, for example, where mayors from all different kinds of cities in the area are trying to work together to find what their common agenda is when it comes to mobility. I'm really glad that Southwestern Ontario is moving in this area, moving forward this way. I think it's going to make it easier for the province to understand what the whole region is really looking for, and I'm delighted to endorse it.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed, 6-0.
Okay, that brings us to item number 6, streetlight design standards. I think it was Councillor Van Holst who pulled this. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. And I had a couple of questions through the chair to our staff. I think I'm referring to page 53, and there's point number 6. The maximum number of lights that can be attached to a single circuit is 10, unless our calculations can prove that it can accommodate more. And I'm wondering how many regular street lights for the HPS ones can be put on one circuit, and if we think that this is going to be substantially more than 10 because these are LED. And I had a couple more questions, but I'll maybe ask that.
I'll begin, and I'll ask Mr. McGuire to articulate the specific differences. But as you're well aware, the LED lighting systems draw much less energy, watts compared to hundreds of watts in most cases. So obviously there's a significant difference in the number that we can attach per circuit that exists. But I think the intent of this is primarily for a new system specification. So we're looking at putting a maximum number of lights per circuit for 2 reasons. One is to make sure that if the circuit goes down for one reason or another, we're only pulling off a certain number of lights. And secondly, of course, is that you want to maximize the number of lights per gauge of copper that you're pushing out as part of the circuit. So with that, I'll ask Mr. McGuire to further that discussion if he chooses to do so.
Through the chair, yes, the current standard we have is 10 lights per circuit, and that works well for the voltage drop. Switching to the LEDs, yeah, we think might be able to get more, but we will need some detailed calculations for that voltage drop. The one thing we're also looking at is reducing the wire size. So reduce the wire size, you can't put as many lights on that circuit. The other thing to keep in mind is we also want to reduce the number of road crossings wherever possible. Because that future maintenance of digging up that road, because 9 times out of 10, that's where the wire's going to break. It's either under someone's driveway or under a road. So keeping the number in reasonable. So 10 seems to work well today, but it is something that we are keeping our eye on.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just wondering what the cost of a circuit is. Is that a significant factor in this equation?
Through the chair, the actual pulling of the aluminum wire, because we still use aluminum, is a minor cost compared to the cost of the fixture and the poles.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe ask you to comment as well through the chair on the possibility of sensors. I was, again, at this Smart Cities Forum, a representative from Kansas City who does some really impressive things. They worked streetlights into their Smart Cities program, and they had a couple observations. One is that you can turn down you can put 60% less power through them, and it's still really undetectable by the human eye. But they also have sensors to make them a little brighter or turn on. And some of the advantages of this is that, for instance, where the lighting is brighter, they've noticed crime is 10% less. So I'm wondering if we're going to consider, or if we have considered sensors on any of these lighting fixtures or in our plans going forward.
Through the chair, the last, or I guess it was this year, we did the phase 1 of the LED upgrade on the major roads. And as part of that, we specified a fixture that could be upgraded in the future when the technology gets to the point that it's an economical and it does make sense. So we didn't go down that road just yet. I know a few cities have ventured down into the adaptive, so you can dial down the street lights or turn some off. There are some other problems that raises, but we do have that option. So we're not there yet, but it is available with just some change in some hardware.
Well, thank you much. Thank you very much. I appreciate that the city keeps future compatibility in mind. And those are the end of my questions. Thanks.
Any other questions, colleagues, about the streetlight design centers? Councillor Morgan.
So my understanding is the Phase 1 LED streetlight upgrade was very successful, saves us a bunch of money. Phase 2 seems like a great idea for new residential developments, and this change makes a lot of sense to me. I'm wondering, at what point will we see a business case for the third phase of possible LED changeovers in existing residential neighborhoods? And my understanding is that there may not be the same level of payback because of the wattages in those neighborhoods, but will we see that at some point down the road?
Through the chair, as you mentioned, the phase 1 was a very good payback. Phase 2, because we're now looking at some lower wattages on the minor roads, but still with that light that's over top of the road, still has a good payback. The cost of those fixtures is still reasonable. But going to the post-top residential fixtures at the moment, it's really cost prohibitive from a change-out perspective and the energy savings. So as more are used and manufactured, those prices will come down. We've seen that with the Cobra style, and I fully expect that will happen with the post-tops. So I don't think it's in the next couple years.
And that was my understanding, is that, as technology improves, it may become, the cost benefit may sway in that. It is probably a question we will get. So knowing the answer, on why new residential developments have a certain type of light and existing don't, is helpful to me and I think our colleagues, so we can respond to those questions. So thank you for the answer.
I don't see any other questions or comments, so let's have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote, motion passed 6-0.
That brings us to item number 7, parking between the sidewalk and the roadway. I believe this was pulled by Councillor Morgan.
Yeah, and oddly, I don't remember my question, because I think Mr. Soldo answered it for me earlier today when I met with him, so I don't need to pull it anymore, so.
This would be a great opportunity for you to move the recommendation, and then we'll see if any of my colleagues have any questions or comments on this item while it's before us. Okay, seeing none, let's move to the voting.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote, motion passed 6-0.
Brings us to item number 8, which is the staff report on Infrastructure Canada Phase 1 for Clean Water and Wastewater Fund. I believe this is also pulled by Councillor Morgan, and I expect he has questions about this one.
Yes, number 8 is the Phase 1. My comments were actually, I'm very happy to see the, the list of projects. I think that this is great. This, in combination with another report later on the Phase 1 infrastructure projects, is, I think, a really important example of, multi-level government's approach to these projects. Despite the fact that we will have to find a way to, fund our portion of them should they be approved, I think it's a rare opportunity that we have where multiple levels of government are interested in investing in municipal infrastructure, and taking advantage of this as a city is, I think, a really important step. So I wanted to emphasize the importance of this report and the subsequent report that we'll have on the transit-based Phase 1 submissions as that opportunity. And although it may be challenging to figure out how we will implement and fund all of the projects from a municipal standpoint, I think rarely do we see these opportunities come along, and thanks to our other levels of government partners for making such funding programs available for municipalities to fund. So I'll certainly be supporting this. I know it's a lot of money. Hopefully we do quite well in the process, and thanks to all the work that staff has done on this, and if we get approved, for a lot more future work on figuring out how to implement all of these projects.
Any other questions or comments? Mayor Brown and then Councillor Cassidy.
Yeah, this is an exciting day, and I'll spend some more time talking about this when we get to the transit report as well. But there's a reason why, when we look at this Infrastructure Canada Phase 1 project list, there's a reason why the ministry has community building right in its title. And so when we reach out to our federal partners and they see themselves spending money on infrastructure, what isn't lost on any of us, or what shouldn't be lost on any of us, is that we're building better communities for every Canadian, and that's our opportunity here. Certainly, the Big City Mayors Caucus has spent a great deal of time working with the federal government on programs exactly like this, because we recognize that what's good for cities is good for the country. 85% of the population lives in our larger cities, and the vast majority of the GDP is generated from the larger cities. And so opportunities like this aren't simply spending dollars, they aren't simply closing infrastructure gaps, they're making our lives better. And this is really exciting to see. I know we had a series of commitments that were brought forward during that campaign a year ago from the new federal government, and this is their opportunity to follow through on those commitments. So I'm optimistic, and I'm looking forward to all of these city building initiatives. It's not just about water and wastewater, it's about making a better London for all of us. John has a different phrase for that, but I'm not going to ask him to say it today. And John, you're still here. You understand what retirement means, right? Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just take that a little bit further. I often remark that it might not be a coincidence that there are a lot of Johns in that department. So I don't know. Maybe.
Nice one, nice one.
I'm wondering, I see this list, it's not in any alphabetical order or anything like that. I'm wondering if it's in any kind of priority order, or do you have it, the list in another manner that you can see the priorities? And I'm asking that because I noticed in the report that there seems to be a need at some point down the road, once the funding is allocated, for some kind of a dance. You have to have everything pretty much ready to go. And I trust, through you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Brahm has left things in a really good state for Ms. Cher. Welcome. I want to add my welcome too. But I'm wondering if there is any concern with this succession, with this changeover to a new city engineer, knowing that everything has to be sort of in the right place at the right time when we're ready to go.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to this issue, because this is an incredibly important day for all of us, and you know, we'll speak more to it when we hit the transit side too, which is equally important. But what it speaks to, in essence, is that we could pick this list of prioritized work, and this is prioritized work, and there's certain requirements, there's certain requirements of timing that this expenditure has to be made down. So most of this design is actually underway or has been underway. So what it speaks to realistically is an extremely good asset management plan for water and wastewater infrastructure. Mr. Lucas has been instrumental for the last several years in moving that asset management plan forward. I've been just sitting at the top kind of directing it to some way, and Kelly will have absolutely no trouble in doing that as well. So I want to assure you that certainly there will be a seamless transition, and I've in many cases said to Kelly directly that I don't live that far away, and it's not like I'll be doing a whole lot of things. So, you know, if you have trouble with something, I'm more than happy to lend at least an opinion on whatever that is that may be necessary. But once again, this speaks to, we're glad for the opportunity. This is going to certainly help our sustainability in a huge way. It's going to actually, it's going to draw it closer for everyone. Yes, we do have to bring some funding forward, but we're able to bring these projects forward in a hurry and meet these timeframes. The challenge will be one of resources as well, because we're adding a significant amount of work to the engineering area. But I'm confident that Ms. Scheer and Mr. Lucas are more than capable of ensuring that takes place.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and through you to staff again. Just wondering if there's going to be some positive budgetary impacts on this, or will we not see those? You seem to have said that we're going to have to draw more resources in order to make use of these, but in respect in the future, we'll have been saved some money. Do we think that that's going to have a positive impact on our budget and give us some wiggle room in other areas?
I'm going to let Mr. Lucas speak to this in just a second, but I do want to remind us that the last 3 or 4 or 5 years in particular have been very difficult for us with the declining consumption that we've observed. Actually, it's been declining for the last, since about 2002, so 15 years. We've seen a steady decline of 1% to 2% of our total consumption on a per annum basis. That means a lot in terms of the revenue dollars that are drawn from that. So this will certainly go a long ways to patching that level and reaching us to what we call the threshold level, where we'll start to increase our consumption again. So it will go a long ways to doing that. And certainly it will aid us when we're getting close to 75-cent dollars. That's going to be a significant change to some of those very needed projects as well, that, you know, that in the longer term we've accelerated. So we'll be getting, you know, in due course, 75-cent or 75-cent or 25-cent dollars is what we're going to be expending. So it's going to make a difference. There's no doubt about it. It will make a difference, and hopefully we'll be able to return any benefit to the ratepayers. So.
Okay, I don't see any other questions or comments, so perhaps you indulge me from the chair. I've got a couple. So on page 65, it's talking about how we have more in the request here than what we expect our allocation to be. So we have something in the order of $69 million in projects, and we're going to narrow it down to 40. And then there's some criteria listed off to say this is sort of how we're going to make the decision around what's going to be on the actual short list. And those criteria, meet the criteria to best maximize approval. That's smart, you know, things that might get approved, that's a good one. Have the least scheduling risks to maximize claims. Recognize multiple benefits, including operating cost reductions. Prepares the city for phase 2 of the program. And I just wonder if our staff could speak to sort of what weight these things have, because they're all important criteria, sure, but, you know, the piece around recognizing multiple benefits such as operating cost reductions, you might have a totally different perspective on that than members of the committee do. So could you speak to how you're gonna, if they're weighted, or how you're gonna make those decisions around narrowing down the list?
Yeah, through the chair, it's not weighted. They're all very important, and any one of them will leave you wanting, so to speak. The first one, if it doesn't meet the criteria or we're risking it, what we understand is we have a $41 million cap, so to speak. And if we submit something and it doesn't get approved, we don't get a second shot at it. So we want to make sure that we hit the mark the first time, because we can't put in a list that is longer for them to just agree up to a point of, say, 41 million. The scheduling risks are very important, and there may be some flexibility in that, in that we're hearing that there may be a 25% of a project or the program that can extend into the following year, which is giving us a broader window. Instead of trying to get everything done next year, we'll be into March of 2019, which gives us another construction year. We don't understand that one yet. We're waiting for some more details. So that one may be less important once we get that information. Multiple benefits, that's something that's important to us. And if we can work it in as a secondary benefit, that would be preferable, and it saves us operating costs down the road and maybe helping to fund the extra capital. Preparing us for phase 2 is really important, because that program, the federal funding commitment, is twice the amount per year on average than the phase 1. So if we're not ready for phase 2, and we think we're crammed and jamming right now to fill a void of work and good valuable work and good quality work, it'll be doubly so if we're not prepared a year from now when it comes application time for phase 2. So that one is very important. And of course, we do want to fill up the 40 million, even though we've identified 69 million potentially. We seem to have enough, but we want to make sure that we do fill it up. And in doing so, there is some, you notice we've listed some that say up to. It's an elastic band. We can do more, we can do less. So if the budget is managed as a whole 41 million, if we have a project approved that can elastically be shrunk or stretched, we can maintain our total allotment. So we've thought about it strategically, but we didn't have all the details from the funding authority to completely understand and come up with a short list. And that information has just come out, and we are, as I said, we are just having discussions now to understand it better, and we do have to turn this around quickly and submit it by the end of the month.
Mr. Brom.
Thank you. Just to add a little bit more understanding as to how we select these particular projects, as Mr. Lucas has pointed out all the criteria that it needs to fit, to be qualified for the phase 1 funding. There's 3 fundamental elements that we check to determine the priority. First and foremost is health. Okay, does this main continue? Is it in any way, or is it perceived in any way of jeopardizing health? That could be a main, could be an installation of a chlorinator or a pump station, whatever the case may be. Second of all is mechanical. Is it doing the job that it needs to do? Or is it breaking? Is it leaking? Is it mechanically sound? And then the third element that we look to doing is whether or not it meets the hydraulic needs. In other words, does it meet the requirements for fire protection? Can it deliver the water to the place that it needs to deliver the water to? So those are just high-level criteria that we use to assess the full risk and the priority to some degree to those projects that will be, that we'll be managing as we move forward with the final project list.
Okay, thank you. I think that's helpful for me anyway, and hopefully it's helpful for members of the committee as well. I want to talk a bit about the sewer separation program acceleration, because certainly that's something that I think, considering the need and the total amount of money that we need to spend on combined sewer separation over a long period of time, $17 million, it seems like a big number, but it's really not a big number in the context of all the work that needs to happen there. So I'm glad to see it on the list. I'm a little concerned that because it's a big number and it's the kind of thing that is a flexible, you could do more, you could do less. It's also very disruptive in terms of, it requires big construction works. What likelihood there is that that's where we might pull back when we start looking at some of these projects? Because my own priority sense of some of these things is that combined sewer separation is really, really important. And I wonder if Mr. Lucas or the rest of our staff have some comments on that.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Something like that and many of these other projects with the elastics on them, if we don't do this amount of work or any of it in phase one because of some time constraint or other reason, it's going to be a dandy project for phase two, which goes on for 8 years. So 17 is just what we thought as a maximum we could somehow jam into 1 year. There is certainly a much larger program with much more money that can be put together as part of the phase two, and certainly sewer separation would be a good project to put forward within phase two. This is just for phase one, so again, if something doesn't make it through phase one, we'll still be considering it in phase two, and it may in fact be bigger because it's a longer program with more money. And that phase two will require more thought on our part, staff part, and recommend that to you as well.
Okay, my last sort of question is around the resourcing comments on page 66. So I realize we already have a very significant infrastructure program already, and we have a very good asset management approach. And, the capital program is pretty much maxed out in terms of our ability to deliver it now. We're also planning very big projects outside of water and wastewater that are coming down, and we're trying to coordinate those as we can, especially in the core area of the city where a lot of these projects are going to be happening. I think we saw it this summer with a fair amount of construction projects underway, a lot of disruptions in the transportation network, more so than usual. And we're just going to see more and more and more of that. And I'm a bit concerned not only with our own internal resourcing and our ability to deliver the capital project, but all the pressure that will be on all the consulting engineers and every other contractor who's involved in these projects, as every municipality in Canada is trying to do the exact same thing we are, which is to accelerate all these projects and fit them into this very limited time window. So I know there's going to be a report coming back. My question really is, I don't want to get into the details now, there's going to be a report, but how soon are we going to see that? Because we're on a very short time window now, and I want to make sure we have an understanding of what we need to do on the operating side in terms of resourcing to deliver this kind of capital program. We may have to make the decision before we even know if we've got all the capital funding approved yet. So I wonder if our staff could just speak to the timing in terms of that report coming back around resourcing.
I'm going to start with this one because some time ago we had an audit, a PwC audit that was completed on our engineering works that we undertake. Within the context of that that audit, it was very clear that we could undertake a significant amount of engineering in-house and do so at a less cost than we could had we consulted or used consultants for that type of work. And that was particularly associated with our renewal projects. This particular process, whether it's in transit and in the water wastewater sections, will add probably 20% of our 20% additional load to the engineering activities. So we will have to begin to hire additional staff to project manage. We'll probably continue to do so under a project management as opposed to design process. And then obviously as the need arises and we have better tools to evaluate the in-house option for undertaking the work in 10 years, we may just utilize those resources that we've gained through this process to undertake the in-house engineering requirements. So, but we will be beginning with the hiring both here and in transit side very rapidly. So it begins now. It begins with with hopefully an understanding of what types of projects we'll actually be undertaking as well. But the hiring process will begin now. I think that at this stage of the game. I think that the consulting world will be all right with the changes that they see, although, you know, there will be a staff requirement from the consulting side as well. You can't add this kind of component to municipalities our size and indeed the entire province without having some strain on the engineering side. But at this point in time, it looks like it's doable. It was doable in 2008 when we had the sustainability funding that was brought into us, and at that point in time, we had $100 million that was needed to be expended in a big hurry. So we did well with that. I think that we can manage this one as well, but there will be some growing pains. We're not hiding that, and the time to start is now. So we'll be bringing a report forward in the very near future. I'm looking at Kelly because I had discussed this with her minutes ago, but certainly we'll be bringing a report forward that outlines the process that we anticipate to be utilizing, and then of course we'll have to discuss that in concert with our HR departments for concurrence and for proceeding along those lines of gaining the staff that we need.
Okay, I'm hoping that we have some ability to act quicker than other municipalities because we have approved a multi-year budget, and especially on the issue of tendering some of this stuff earlier and locking down prices earlier. One of my concerns is not that the consultants won't be available, it's that the consultants will be a lot more expensive because they're going to have so much demand for their services. Not just for these new projects that we're accelerating, but all the things we've already budgeted for and we're planning to do anyway. You know, it's all the same people who will be working on those projects for us. So I'm hoping that we can take advantage, as we have last year, to tender things earlier on, and lock down good pricing before some of our competitor municipalities are in with their bids and trying to get their funding. I'm sure this will be addressed in the report, so I don't want to go on longer than that. I think we've exhausted the debate, but I think it's been a good discussion. I look forward to the discussion on the transit one. Colleagues, any other discussion? No? Okay.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed 6-0.
That brings us to item number 9, the foundation drain disconnection program coming out of our flooding matters work plan. I wonder, it was pulled by Councillor Cassidy, I believe. If you want to speak to it, go ahead.
Thanks. I probably could have asked this question without pulling it, but maybe my colleagues have a question. I just want to make sure I have it clear. So this is a 100% granting program for a specific area in the city compared to the sump pump grant program, which is an individual applies for it and it's 75% coverage. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that is correct. If you recall, we did have that one pilot project where we went into a neighborhood. We enticed 60% with the support of the councillor of the day, and success was measured. And we've been through a number of storms in that same neighborhood, and we still do not see basement flooding. So we are looking for, we have identified areas within neighborhoods. And the reason we're being a little coy about that is, as part of the strategy, we also said we didn't want to stigmatize a neighborhood. So we've got a list here. We know where the streets are. We know which councillors we will be putting the pinch on to help get the word out and promote it. But there are 5 areas, and the flooding in those areas are significant and frequent, and those are the major factors. So if we can get 60% in 1 or 2 of those areas, we do have the funding up to $500,000 to implement the same kind of program where we go in and do the work within the home, pay 100% of the cost.
Mayor Brown and then Councillor Van Holst.
Yeah, I just want to say that this program was a phenomenal success. I remember back in 2010 knocking on doors on Blanchard Crescent up in Sherwood Forest, and people were stressed, people were in tears, people they had great concern because they'd had flooding 2, 3 more times in their basements, and they weren't eligible for insurance anymore. And it was a significant issue for the entire area, and staff came up with a very creative solution, one that required work in the house, one that required significant levels of funding, but the value add for our entire community was that the alternative solution would be much, much more expensive and massive infrastructure enhancement, lots of digging, and millions of dollars. And so this is an example, I think, of extremely creative problem solving, working hand in hand with residents, developing the kind of partnership that allows the workers to enter the homes, to do some significant work within the homes, and to not only, mitigate their damage that they were experiencing in their homes, but also to significantly drop the amount of water that was going into the system. And so, when I read this, I smiled, I reminisced a little bit, and people were really concerned up on Blanchard Crescent. And when you left, people were optimistic, and now they've seen the results. So I want to say a thank you to John and your team for all of the work that's happened over the course of the past many years. And I think this pilot project demonstrated that this can be implemented in priority areas across the city. And I know that other communities are looking at London and checking out what we've done to see if this might work for them as well.
Councillor Van Holst and then Councillor Morgan.
Thank you very much, and through the chair to Mr. Lucas. I'm very excited about this, so much so I'm ready to pinch myself. Of course, this has been a heartbreaking thing. I know in one instance in my ward, someone was smelling the fresh paint in their basement at the same time as they were smelling, well, I don't need to say more, but it's just a sad and disconcerting thing. If we can avoid this, it's great. And by making the kind of change that happened in the mayor's previous ward, we're actually unstigmatizing neighborhoods. So that's great. Thank you.
The mayor is pointing out in the corner that all the wards are his, apparently. Josh, go ahead.
Yes, so to echo and play off of the mayor's comments, when I knocked on doors on Blanchard Crescent in 2014, basement flooding came up 0 times, which I think is a testament to the success of a program like this. And so I think it's great that it's going to be expanded, and it'll be interesting to see where the areas of the cities are. I know there are some that have significant flooding issues, and so I hope the results are similar to there, because within just a few short years, it went from a significant concern to pretty much none. So great success.
I'll just add from the chair that I'm glad to see it coming forward in such a timely way. I know when we started on the work plan, you can see the whole list of reports related to this matter. It goes back many, many years. There's, I think, over a dozen reports just in that list. I'm glad to see that we're making some progress here. I think those targeted areas, trying to get to the right number of people disconnecting, is going to make a really big difference. Very smart way of spending the money to solve this particular problem. We've got other problems with flooding that we're going to have other reports on, but I think it's good progress on this front. Mr. Brown.
I just wanted to elaborate on the mayor's comment about cost, and it was extremely successful. I think that our costs came in at about 20% when compared to conventional processes for removal of the storm from the sanitary in similar situations. So that's by using tanks and other mechanisms, but this was much less disruptive and certainly a much less cost. So.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. I think we'll open the voting.
Closing the vote, motion passed, 6-0.
We've dealt with item 10, so now that brings us to item number 11, which is the staff report on the Enviro Depot Operation and Management Program and the contract award for that. Councillor Hopkins, you pulled this?
Yes, I did, and I want to, first of all, say that the Enviro depots that we have here in the City of London, I think, are one of our greatest assets. I know in the West End, it's used quite a bit, and I can see in the report that we as a city do use our Enviro depots, so definitely think they're great to have in our community. I would like to ask staff through the chair if you could speak to, give us a little bit more detail on the unique proposal here and the responsibilities of the contractor at these Enviro depots.
Through the chair, what the contractor offered as part of their proposal was to get involved with two community gardens. And they've identified a location at each of the depots that they'd be quite prepared to work with the city and any community group that would like to work alongside the city and Try Recycling in this case, to establish the community gardens. As you know, there's many of these already in place in London right now. There's a program in place to expand that, so it would become essentially a part of that program. But Try Recycling has offered up resources, about $2,500 for each of the two depots to put in place too. So that's something that we said we would bring that forward, and when the time was right, we would take them up on that offer. The other item that they brought forward was they were really just addressing a council direction already. It is the North End Depot. And if committee recalls, the city doesn't own land in the far north end at this point in time. It is something as part of our long-term plan. We do wish to have a better location in the north end for an Enviro Depot. But at this point in time, we worked on our relationship with Try Recycling, put in place an Enviro Depot. It's been operating now for about 2 years. It has begun to attract a sizable crowd. About 17,000 visitors have turned up there. It's very, very similar to the two that the city have at their particular locations, as well as the one at our landfill site. Part of the direction from council was to look at making that a longer-term contract. We were fortunate pricing came forward that actually is a little better than the pricing that we currently have. So we brought that forward as part of this report as well. So that became just another item that we could address at the same time.
And if I could just follow up with that, thank you for that. I did have another question too. I know we are starting the 3-bag limit right now with our containers. And I was asked if they could pick up the extra tags at these Enviro depots.
Through the chair, later in December of this year, we will announce the final locations where those tags will be available to allow enough time, because that portion of the program starts January 16th, 2017. The depots represent a logical location because they're conveniently located. There will also be a number of other city facilities where we are currently handling cash and have the ability to offer receipts. So that will be part of the program brought to your attention in the month of December.
Any other comments, colleagues, on this one? If not, let me say I wish every report came forward with this kind of financial impact section. The price went down, the hours of service went up. We reallocated the hours from times where people weren't using it to times when people really need it, and there's huge lines. It's just a service improvement, it's cheaper. There's this unique aspect to it. I think this is just a great result. So kudos to you and also to Try Recycling on the proposal.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed 6-0.
That brings us to item number 12, the staff report, landfill gas utilization update and next steps. I believe that was pulled by Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Through you to our staff, a question which will reference page 92. I'm happy that we're moving forward with this plan, and okay, I was wondering if there might have been an error there. I could see that the page that's been just presented to us corrects that. My other question was with respect to the expected best and worst case scenarios. The best and expected case will prove to be quite a value for us. The worst case, maybe it's not worth all the effort. I'm just wondering if there's a way to hedge things so that we're skewing ourselves away from the worst case scenario.
So just to clarify before we get to the answer there, the page that's being circulated is a replacement for Appendix 2. It's page 96 in the original report on the added agenda, and it's updating the numbers in the financial analysis summary table. And the question was, can we avoid the worst case scenario by some kind of hedging strategy? Good.
Mr. Chair, just so we're clear, that page doesn't change anything in the front end of the report, so we're strictly just getting the math in the right columns. I do apologize for that. Plus, we did add a footnote at the bottom dealing with net present value. It is difficult to protect ourselves against a worst case, but I guess on the positive side, the worst case, when we look at the net present value, is still on the plus side. When we work with our colleagues in finance, as long as we stay on the plus side from a net present value perspective, we're doing quite well. It's obviously not as good, and we have presented the best and expected case. We do believe that expected case is very realistic. We're working with a very qualified landfill gas consultant who we've been working with for many years, so we're quite comfortable with this going forward as is, and that we do believe we will fall somewhere around the best case. Will there be there will be another, as they say, kick at the can. Of course, this is an application process. We have a 15-day window. It's very, very competitive. At that point in time, we'll be able to bring the results back to committee and council on whether this project goes forward, but it very much hinges on tapping into that 17.8 cents per hour kilowatt being offered as part of the Fit 5 program. And as the committee likely knows, last week, the larger program has been canceled in this province. So this might be one of the last opportunities to tie into an energy contract through the Green Energy Act at this point in time from the provincial government.
Councillor Cassidy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm glad Mr. Sanford brought that up because that's what I was going to ask. Because on page 89 and 90, there's a list of recent announcements, and it didn't include the announcement from last week, so I was wondering about the effect there. But I also wonder about the FIT program itself, because it is, the cap has been changed, and it was changed pretty abruptly, I think, and not a lot of notice given. So I'm just wondering if there are any worries about, let's say we get this, let's say we're successful, and it's not the price per kilowatt hour that we're expecting as of present day. Perhaps it could be changed, and are there fears from staff about that?
Through the chair, predicting this file has been a very difficult one. And in fact, that is why we provided just the recent history and all the things changing with the energy infrastructure and the energy portfolio here in Ontario. We stopped predicting. What we do have, though, is very interesting development here. As you notice, we're only handling 20% of our landfill gas under this opportunity. We are going to maximize our opportunity under the Fit 5 program, which allows us to put in place a 0.5 megawatt power plant. The other 80%, though, and the opportunities that have just recently emerged are dealing with compressed natural gas. So as you see on the table there, there's a number of balls in the air that we have following that particular portfolio on where we're looking at actually a higher level of potential profit coming into the city from compressed natural gas and tying in with what's occurring here in Ontario, Quebec, and the California markets dealing with that particular resource. So it is a changing field. We will make sure you're fully informed as we go through this process, but it is one where the window opens for 15 days, our application's closed. 4 months later, there's a yay or a nay, and I believe there's a very limited time to accept or reject, and we'll make sure you're fully in the loop.
Mr. Brahm?
Yeah, in terms of the diversifying, you know, what Jay spoke to is essentially what we've termed a diversified portfolio. He's outlined 5 options in terms of where we expect to go. So in terms of hedging and diversification, I think we've nailed it. We're not putting all our eggs in one basket. Jay and I have been involved with a 2 megawatt situation at the landfill before, and it was turned down by the FIT, and we had funding to actually put it in place from the province at that point in time. So we've been through this mill several times, and I think that the options identified do give us some flexibility and don't tie us to one specific area. So if it fails, it may fail a little bit, but the other sections that we have going to different options will hopefully pull us through, so we still see a net gain from that process.
Any other questions or comments on this one, colleagues? No? Have a mover and a seconder.
Opening the vote.
Colleagues, just, I know we've all voted, but I just want to make sure we're all aware that in Appendix 3, for the bylaw that's going to be coming forward to council, there's a very small amendment which is changing the title from the, I think it's the General Manager of Engineering, Environmental and Engineering Services to the Managing Director, which is the actual title now. So I'm glad that was caught before it got to council.
It's all done. I don't know why. I passed it. Motion passed, 6-0.
I'm sure the anticipation was keeping everyone on the edge of their seat there. Now we're moving on to item number 13. This is the staff report, Infrastructure Canada, Phase 1 Investment, Public Transit Infrastructure Fund, possibly the most exciting report on the agenda. Anyone have any comments? Mayor Brown wants to go. Anyone else?
I'm going to one-up you, Chair, and say definitely the most exciting item on the agenda and a really important milestone that we're coming across today. And as we think about what we've done over the past 2 years as a council, what the city has done over the past 10 to get to this point, this is really exciting because this is where the rubber hits the road. We have listed a whole series of projects, including getting the buses off of Dundas Street within this Phase 1 funding, and this is the first tangible step towards implementing this program. So we think back to May when council made the decision to identify a business case for the BRT, the single largest investment that we've ever considered as a community. That's what's led us to get to this point. Of course, the federal government, the provincial government have come together with an agreement for funding, and we're now able to put our best foot forward with these applications. We have a solid business case. We should be optimistic. We should have high expectations in terms of being awarded funding through this program because of the work that's occurred. And I think also this is an important moment in time because this is a predictor. Of course, Phase 1 funding leads to Phase 2 funding, the significant portion of the funding that will be directed towards our rapid transit system. And again, you know, I said it earlier in my comments that this is city building, that this isn't just infrastructure spending, this isn't just a stimulus for the economy. This is about changing the way London moves and changing the way that London grows. So I'm so pleased to be here at your committee chair to second the motion before us and to recognize that we're sending a clear signal that we're ready to go. We're sending a clear signal that we can have shovels in the ground on a number of projects, and we're again showing a clear signal that we're committed to this rapid transit program.
Any other comments on this item, colleagues? I believe it was Councillor Morgan who pulled it, so I'm expecting some there. Go ahead.
Yes, you know, the mayor spoke first, and that's good because he said most of what I would have said. The only thing I would reemphasize in his comments is something I said at the first level of Phase 1, and that is not for us not to look past the rare opportunity that we have with multiple levels of government aligning with investments in municipal infrastructure. It's something that, you know, it's part of the reason why we're involved in external organizations like the FCM and AMO is to encourage governments to recognize the important role that municipalities play in infrastructure and building the province. And these programs that are being developed that we're passing reports on today are that in action. So it's not just about the work that our staff has done to prepare our list of projects or whether they'll be approved or not and how we'll move forward, but a recognition of the incredible amount of work through previous councils and lobbying through our external organizations to have governments who recognize the important role of municipalities and adequately putting funding programs forward to allow us to do what we cannot do on our own. We cannot afford these significant infrastructure investments with the property tax base. It does require partnerships and multi-level governance, and this is an example of multi-level governance in action. And so, so I certainly think that is something to recognize, and I know that we will have we had our provincial counterparts here presenting to the Civic or the Corporate Services Committee. We'll have our federal counterparts here presenting, and so our continued dialogue and discussion and partnership with them is obviously important to London's success in these funding programs and the continued availability of the funding programs as options offered by other levels of government.
Any other comments, colleagues? No, if not, I've got a couple. So really glad to see we dealt with the related sort of list of projects of the Transit Commission just at the end of September, and it was very helpful to be able to accelerate. I know we have a bit of a problem. It's like the curse of being the good asset managers. It's difficult to accelerate some of these things when you've already got a 10-year capital plan with all these things that have sources of financing already. And I think we're identifying, projects that really well match the criteria of the fund. Even when you look at the active transportation pieces that we're talking about, they're all related to the transit piece that we're doing. We're in a really good position to take advantage of this program and funding. I don't know how their municipalities are really going to be able to do it. We're just at the perfect timing where we've got the transportation master plan. We have a major EA underway with SHIFT. We know the kind of things we need to do, but it's a matter of accelerating a lot of these projects, especially the ones that we can get these done earlier. That's going to take some of the pinch off when we get to some of the construction later on, because we're going to be under construction for, a decade or so. So I'm happy to see them. I wanted to ask about a couple of these projects. There's something in here that says bike parking facility near downtown bus rapid transit. That seems like a very good idea. I also wonder if there's an opportunity, we were just speaking about the multimodal transportation piece, in and around the Via Rail station. So, that's close to where the bus rapid transit station would be. I don't know if this is what that means, but these kind of secure bike parking facilities, that's something that has come out of the cycling master plan feedback. That's something that, if you're gonna leave your bike for hours and go to another city and come back, you don't really wanna tie it up to a post. And I wonder if there's opportunities there, and I wonder if our staff might speak to that specific project that has a budget of 120,000, whether there's opportunity to perhaps do something at the train station, which has got its own infrastructure money through the federal government.
Mr. Chair, that particular item was not focusing on the Via Rail area. It was focusing on more on around Victoria Park was where we had our initial eyes, or something along Queen Street where we've got a couple of municipal parking lots. The suggestion of something stronger with Via Rail, I think would be ideal. It is one where we currently don't have our share of the funds set aside. So if that is something that does change over the next little bit, I do think that building something down there would be ideal, whether that occurs in the short term or in the longer term. That'll be clearly a good fit as part of what you've described about multimodal.
So I wonder, colleagues, I know this is the list here, we're at committee, and I wonder if our staff could perhaps think about that between now and council, and perhaps if there's an adjustment we need to make, we can make it at that time. I don't know we need to make any motions there, but I don't think it would be a huge expenditure, but it might make sense to put it in as a request if we think we can accomplish it in the time period we're talking about. I just wanted to say overall, I think that we've really picked a lot of very good projects. Obviously getting the money for the EA for SHIFT is a really crucial step in advancing that project. The timing is perfect. The mayor's spoken about, accelerating downtown, but also when you look at the overall mix, it's all throughout the sort of core transit area. You got all kinds of projects happening in that primary transit area, and I think that it's really speaking to what we've articulated already in the London plan in terms of focusing that kind of infrastructure. I'm really happy to see this going forward, and I think we're going to do really well in the funding.
Through the chair, then we'll take it upon ourselves to discover any additional projects and submit them through to the chair and committee so that they can have a look at them before council, then, if that's appropriate.
Okay, I don't see any other more comments, so it's been moved and seconded.
Opening the vote? Closing the vote? Motion passed, 6-0.
So, colleagues, we're moving into our scheduled item, which is item number 17, I believe. Yeah, I want to make sure you saw the added communication that came in, that's been added to the agenda. I wonder at this point, this is going to be, I would imagine, a 25-minute presentation, questions. It's going to be a while. If we want to take a 2-minute recess, just a quick little break, and then we'll get into the presentation. Okay, can I have a motion to have a recess for 5 minutes? Moved by Councillor Morgan, seconded by Councillor Van Holst. All those in favor? Okay, we'll be back in 5 minutes, and we'll be talking about the Mud Creek EA, which is very exciting. I shouldn't have said that about the public transit. The Mud Creek is probably the most exciting. Okay, after a brief recess, we're going to call the meeting back to order. Looks like we've got a quorum. There you go. We've got everybody. Mr. Mathers, if you'd like to lead us off with the presentation about the Mud Creek EA.
Through the chair, thank you for granting my delegation on this important project. So I'm here today to speak to specifically and provide an update for the Mud Creek Stormwater Environmental Assessment. And before I get too far into this, I'd like to acknowledge there is a couple of the landowners that are here today. There's two of the three Haggerty brothers who represent the Edmar lands, and then Michael Hannay is here as well, who's an agent for ESAM Group. So they'll be here to hear this message. It is right up to date, so even as of last week, there was some discussions being undertaken, so I'll be updating you on that as well. So firstly, I'd like to begin with very high level, provide an overview of the problem, and I think this will add some context to the overall report. Just to give you a little bit of the bearings of where we're located, I've got the pointer here. This is Wonderland Road, Oxford Street, and then we have right here Proudfoot Lane, and this location is beloved Fleetway Bowling, and as well there is the Forest Glen Golf Center here as well. And I'll show you some photos of from fairly recently. This is 2014 of flooding that's occurred in this location. And this is what I would describe as frequent flooding. So this is flooding that happens once every 1 or 2 years. It impacts the operation of this very major road, which is Oxford Street. It's a key east-west link, Oxford Street, of course, and it is also going to be a location of one of the rapid transit corridors. So this is not something that is really appropriate level of service for this type of roads. We will be speaking to later on extreme flooding, which is that kind of flooding that happens every 250 years. And of course, we'd never want Oxford Street to be overtop, but if it's 1 in 250 years, that's a different thing from every 1 or 2 years. So I just wanted to highlight that. This is looking in the westerly direction. You can see the gas bar on the corner here as well. So it is a significant amount of flooding and impacts the use of the roadway. So what caused this? Well, this is a picture of myself at a culvert. It is a culvert was constructed in the 1880s. I'll just point out, you can see actually the brickwork here, like just hand-laid brickwork, and definitely has lasted the test of time. And this culvert is the issue that's causing the water backing up during these large storm events. And standing here, there's a mountain in front of you of the embankment for the CN rail. So this goes right through the CN rail tracks. So next here, this kind of shows the location of the CN rail culvert, just as opposed to the flood-prone area. And it gives you a little bit of an idea of how far they're separated geographically. What I have here is actually aerial photography from 1922. So at this point, this culvert would have been 40 years old and been in service of 40 years. And it kind of gives you the context that under which this culvert was installed. It wasn't installed to allow huge amounts of development to proceed. It was installed for rural drainage at the time. So I think the engineer who designed this, they really got their money's worth because it did provide servicing for a long period of time. And for the most part, this area has been built out. Hundreds of hectares have been built out. And there's only 50 hectares approximately remaining to be built out. And that's what we're really talking about as part of this EA process. Huge history of studies in the area, as well as the actual history of the culvert itself, going back to the 1980s and up to even the 2000s as well. What I will state about all these studies, it was a very common theme that the main constraint was this culvert, and that's what our EA is going to be making a recommendation as far as a replacement of the culvert and the water and some remediation to the water courses up and downstream. So that is really what's going to come out of this EA at the end. However, there's a bunch of different processes which we'll be going into a little bit further that really makes this process more complex than most environmental assessments. So with that, I'm going to introduce Shauna Chambers. She is the project manager for the Mud Creek Environmental Assessment. She's going to take us through the actual EA process.
Thank you, Scott. And through the chair, I'll continue the presentation. I'd like to speak mostly about the Mud Creek EA process and how it kind of fits into today's status update. There's going to be a future report that will actually outline all of the details of the preferred option, but we really just want to give that high level and address kind of where we're going with the study. This is sort of a tale of a creek between two railroads. There is a CP rail to the north and that CN rail to the south. And the creek is kind of nestled between a lot of high-density residential and commercial. So over the past, 30 years, there's been a lot of development going on in that area, uncontrolled storm flows. So we see that flooding that Scott showed earlier. There's also a lot of natural heritage area that remains. So integral to this process is also the environmental impact study. And so both of those were formative in creating our preferred option. The objectives, though, of the EA study itself was basically to mitigate that flooding that we see happening so frequently over the Oxford Street corridor, and also seeing an opportunity to improve the creek corridor as well. There's a photo there in the bottom of the sedimentation that's occurring in the creek, and that's common upstream of each culvert. It's just representative of all that stormwater runoff from the urban area, and just over time it's built up without an outlet because of that small CN rail culvert. So we saw the opportunity to mitigate the creek as well as to improve the flooding. So that was the main focuses of the EA. A lot of public engagement on this because of, basically it's nestled right in the middle of the city. We had 2 public meetings as kind of the standard practice, but as an enhanced level, we also had site walks with the residents who live downstream of the CN rail, and their main concern was about the wildlife and the disruption to that natural corridor, which is an amenity to them, and also just their concern for wildlife in general. Those site walks were very successful. People appreciated that we're really trying to enhance the environment through this project, and that the net benefit in the end will kind of justify the short-term pain for the long-term gain. But also to this public engagement piece were the 3 landowners in the area who would like to develop some of the lands that remain, the 50 hectares of undeveloped lands. We had a lot of meetings with them and shared communications, emails back and forth. They're in attendance today, 2 of the 3. And those lands, basically, I'm going to speak to right now. We have a large draft approved subdivision, multifamily, and a bit of high density, as well as park space here. And that's the Sam Katz Developments lands, ESAM lands, and those are draft approved. The latest approval was in the year 2000. We also have the Edmar land, which is the Forest City Golf Club, or I should say Forest Glen Golf Center, that they're interested in rezoning and redeveloping. And then we have the Bluestone Properties here, who also have had a site plan in the past, and they were delayed due to the floodplain resolution issues. Again, we just saw a picture of that culvert that's kind of the cause of issues on also development as well, not just flooding. So it's preventing development from occurring, and it's still causing flooding to happen. So Scott alluded earlier to the frequent flooding. What happened was at the end of last summer, we had resolved the frequent flooding solutions. We thought of the culvert, some channel improvements, and kind of all was well on the EA front. But the land developers and, interested parties wanted to know, well, what are the impacts to the development limits? Where is the floodplain? And the floodplain is the extreme flooding events. So that is the jurisdiction of the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority to resolve. But in this case, because of everyone's interest, we took that, basically our consultant, to conduct that floodplain modeling for the Upper Thames. They're very constrained on their resources in their modeling department, so this expedited that process. So what we found, this initial model was provided to our consultant by the Upper Thames, and that light blue line represents the existing floodplain today, an updated version of it, basically based on that constraint with the culvert. And then when our consultant did the modeling with our preferred solution in place, that's essentially the red line is the new floodplain. So what we see is the solution resolves flooding from the hatched blue area. That's the Fleetway Bowling Center effectively is currently in the floodplain now, technically. Again, this is subject to updates that the Upper Thames have to make to the mapping. And we don't anticipate them making any updates until we do the works. There's kind of one of these chicken and egg potentially situations, but they can only update to the red floodplain once we do the work. So it's important to kind of get those existing properties out of the floodplain as well. due to all the level of high interest, not only from the landowners that are in development, but also the environmental impact that the study's gonna have, we did a preliminary distribution of the EA. So usually we do the notice of completion and 30-day public review, but we have done an initial circulation, and we received a lot of comments from Upper Thames, EPAC, and those landowners of flood impacted lands. So due to the high level of comments received, we're basically asking today just for additional funding for our consultant to address those comments and to do some more technical modeling to sort of optimize some of the systems that could be looked at again to sort of fix up some of the development lands in a maybe more appropriate way. So this was exactly why we wanted to come here today, give the status update as to why, again, are we coming for more funds? And Scott would also like to go back to how this process fits into other integrated processes. Just to, kind of, my role is just kind of separate this out that the EA is one item and there are two other items to be addressed.
So absolutely, when I said this was complex, I wasn't making that part of it up. There's three interrelated processes that are ongoing right now to try to allow those development lands to proceed. One of the critical pieces of that puzzle is the Mud Creek EA. That's something that's being led by the Stormwater Engineering Group. There's also development approvals component. And developing that limit of the development. That's being led by the Development Services Division and the support of the Planning Department. And we do have a number of the individuals from that group here today to answer any questions about that process. And then as well, we have the floodplain regulation, and that regulation is the mandated Upper Thames River Conservation Authority, and they are led by their guidelines that's provided by the province. So there's that additional layer of the process as well. So firstly, the Mud Creek EA, the next steps going forward. We have the comments from a number of the landowners and from EPAC and from the Conservation Authority. We want to reflect those in the document. We then would be actually presenting the final EA to the Environmental and Ecological Planning Advisory Committee and to the Civic Works Committee, and we're scheduling that for the second quarter of 2017. Next would be the statutory public review process for that EA, the 30-day review, and then we'd be commencing the actual detailed design and moving forward with construction. Along with that process, and in parallel with this process, we can also proceed with the development approvals. In that process, the developer would work with the various agencies, including Development Services, the Conservation Authority, and the Planning Group, with respect to what they need to be able to move forward their development processes. So firstly, we've got actually completing development applications, moving through the development process, a subdivision process, or the site plan process, depending on the actual application. Then we have looking at the floodplain. If there's changes to the floodplain, that's something that we'll be working with the Conservation Authority to adopt. And then as well, there would be that EIS component, or the environmental impact study work to determine the limit of development for those individual development parcels as well. And any of those processes may require official plan amendments. Then the third process is this floodplain process. So the city has control over the EA. We need to finish that EA, and then we will construct the work. The floodplain doesn't actually change until our work is installed. Even though we might say that we have a program, we know approximately where the floodplain is going to be, the Conservation Authority wouldn't actually approve it until it's built. So that's something that's really key. As part of that development process, the developers will also be working with the Conservation Authority to look at different scenarios for cutting and filling on their lands. And then at a certain point, the Conservation Authority would then approve both the new floodplain throughout the area. And then that may also trigger some official plan changes as required. So on top of this, there was a meeting that was scheduled the last Friday, September 30th. It was a very productive meeting, and what came out of that meeting was a letter that was on the added agenda, and I'm just going to speak directly to that letter. During that meeting and in that letter, we have an alternative concept for the ESAM lands, which is the large development block, as far as what they're proposing to do from a stormwater management perspective. In looking at this concept, we thought it really did have a lot of credibility, and was something that we wanted to look at going forward in more detail for sure. So coming out of those activities, it was decided that as part of the EA process that we'd want to recognize that concept, work with the consultant that is also the developer's consultant. And we think there's a lot of really great reasons for doing that. We feel it's beneficial because it ensures that the EA alternative will have that seamlessly dovetailed with the development, what's happening on the development side. So we think there is a benefit in actually incorporating that into the EA process. And it would be noted as well that this work on the development portion would be something that's designed and constructed by the developer. But we'd want to ensure that that really aligns with what the city's bringing forward as well to the south. So in conclusion, this is as I said, Mud Creek is a very complex study. We want to bring forward that final report. We would like to go back to EPAC committee as there has been some changes, especially including the development proposal. We'd be looking at that notice of completion for the second quarter of 2017. And as we proceed through this process, the development application process can actually in parallel mirror what we're doing. But I don't want to understate that the EA really does need to be finalized before that development process concludes. So we can go in parallel, but at some point we have to finish this EA. And just to sum that up, I just would like to note that we're not the first people to study this area, but we'd like to be the last. So that's how we're moving forward with this project. Thanks.
Thank you. Through the chair, just a final note here. So we're returning to you requesting additional funding for this particular engineering consulting firm. As you've heard and hopefully clearly, it was clearly articulated, the additional requirements that are upon us for management of this particular EA. This has been an extremely long legacy EA. I think this has been ongoing for over 30 years. So, and as Scott has indicated, we'd like to be the last ones that attempt to do this and actually come through with a solution. So with that, you have a report. In terms of the overall, the engineering costs associated with this EA, I just want to add one other little item here. The anticipated costs are in the neighborhood of about $10 million for this particular works. So when we're looking at the cost of the EA in this case here, we're sitting roughly at $468,000, which is a very small fraction associated with the, when it's compared to what the overall cost outcomes are going to be. So with that, you have our report. Thank you, Scott and Shauna.
Thanks very much for the presentation, quite comprehensive, as always. Colleagues, questions on this topic? Councillor Hopkins and Councillor Van Holst.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation and the report. It is quite a long process here that this area has been going through. And I'm trying to make sense of how we're moving forward. And in the presentation, I heard a lot about determining the floodplain. I understand the city is doing that right now. And obviously that would have to be confirmed by Upper Thames. So I also heard that wherever this floodplain may be, buildings on the floodplain, if there are any, would have to be removed. If I could have confirmation on how that is going to be undertaken, and also just the process of determining the floodplain. I'm not sure why Upper Thames would not, or are they part of it, or will it only go to Upper Thames at the end?
Through the chair, absolutely. Upper Thames has been instrumental for us moving this project along. We've had a lot of work with them, and we've really built a really strong relationship with them through this project. We've learned a lot about working together. This was one of the first projects where we really were trying to merge the way that we were working on a project. That's why that we actually moved forward with considering the city undertaking with our consultant the actual floodplain work. They have extremely strong staff at Upper Thames. However, they just didn't have the capacity to do that type of work at that amount of time frame that we needed. So we offered, and we knew that it was something that was really critical for the developers in the area to understand what the impact of this project was on their development. As far as actually the buildings within the area, I can gladly say that the new floodplain won't impact existing buildings, but we also want to ensure that it's not going to impact any kind of new structures. And this new option that's been provided by the development interests on the north side of Oxford, it has a huge potential to be able to provide a floodplain that's not going to impact this new development. And it's going to really create a floodway that's going to allow them to move forward and allow for this really critical piece of the city to be able to be built out.
Other questions or comments? I have Councillor Van Holst. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, I appreciate the innovations being suggested by the developers. I also have a question that, well, maybe a dumb question, but it seems like an obvious one. So this culvert is taking water from the river side of the tracks, like the Thames River side of the railway, and pouring it into the Oxford Street side. So I'm just wondering why we wouldn't fill that culvert full of concrete and just run it to the river. So perhaps you would answer that question for me.
Sure, I should have put some arrows on our figure, and we'll do that next time. So the water's actually coming from the Oxford Street side and then going to the river. So the river is the outlet. Otherwise, that would be a great plan. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So it's so that culvert isn't sufficient a drain. Okay. Thanks. I knew that was a high point, so it seemed odd to me. All right, thank you. Mr. Chair, I don't have any more dumb questions.
That's great. That's usually my area of expertise, so I'm glad to see you're branching out. As somebody who, I lived in this area, actually, when I first moved to London, I lived in this apartment building right in the middle of that page at the bottom, looks like an L. I lived there, and I used to walk right through this area to get to the grocery store before they closed it, which was really frustrating. But I can tell you, it's quite an interesting area, and if you'd been down there, you'd know that it's draining that way. I'm glad to see that we're, first of all, I just want to be clear, I support the recommendation, increase the consulting assignment and the budget for that. I think it's a really good idea that we circulated the draft and we got all these really detailed comments, and now we need to respond to them. I think managing all of the different interests and things that are happening at the same time in this area it's really important that we're doing the best possible thing. It costs a little bit more money to do the EA. I think that's very appropriate, and certainly we've approved EAs for other projects that are much higher than this, and I think it's really quite a modest amount of an increase considering what we're talking about in terms of work. It's when I mean, looking forward to see the EA actually come back. It's going to involve a lot of significant changes. I haven't seen the actual draft, but I imagine we're talking about a lot of adjustments when we talk about, you know, we're going to cut out a bunch of trees here, and we're going to have new plantings, and we're going to reline the creek in some areas. Like, there's a lot of things that are going to happen to make this red line possible. So I'm interested to see that come forward. I'm sure my colleagues are as well. But on the issue of increasing the consulting assignment budget, I think that's very, very appropriate. I'm glad to see that we've got folks from planning and development services here and the landowners. To me, it seems like we're going towards a outcome that's going to be very positive for everybody involved. Colleagues, any questions or comments on this one? No? Okay, let's have the motion come up. Sorry, Councillor Usher. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks very much for allowing me to speak at your meeting. I just have a quick question. I was browsing through the letter that was added here from Mr. Hane, and I noticed that it's dated September 30th, which is just a few days ago. And I wondered if some of this information was conveyed to staff before, and whether some of this was taken into consideration in this comprehensive presentation, because I really appreciate the presentation. I just want to make sure that such a letter doesn't mean that we have to accept everything. I just want to know if it was taken into consideration. Can you ask the staff to address that?
Mr. Mathers, go ahead.
Sure. Yes, through the chair. We did have the opportunity. Mr. Haney was working late Sunday night to get this letter out. He did circulate it to the staff that were involved in the meeting. It was an output of a meeting that was had with staff, so we were aware what was coming out of it. We thought it was a very productive meeting, and we think it's very positive. I did incorporate just a small slide in the presentation that I think what we've had already prepared and put in the report really does align with what they've suggested in the letters.
Thanks very much. That's a great question. Okay, colleagues, I don't see any more questions or comments, so let's move to the voting. It's been moved and seconded.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed, 5-0.
Thanks very much for attending and for sitting through all the discussions of the previous items, even when yet it was indicated there 4:15. It was no sooner than 4:15. That brings us to the 8th report of the Transportation Advisory Committee. Colleagues, are there any questions or comments about that? Okay, I'm not seeing any, so if someone would like to move it, you'll note that there's a request to have staff present about Dundas. Go ahead.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed, 5-0.
Okay, that brings us to item 19, a councillor's submission about road hockey and letting kids play. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and through you, I'm requesting here that we ask staff to review our bylaws that could potentially prohibit street hockey from being played. As of course, we received a letter from the Minister of Children and Youth Services encouraging cities to make sure that that's possible. Now, of course, we make bylaws, and sometimes they have unintended consequences. And if our bylaw does in fact prohibit street hockey, then to me, the unintended consequence is that we're really no longer part of Canada. So I'd like to make sure that Canadian kids can do the Canadian thing, which is play street hockey. So I'm sure this can be done in a safe manner, and I'm just looking for staff to provide that clarification about our bylaw. Thank you.
Okay, I've got Councillor Cassidy and then Councillor Hopkins. At some point, I think we'll probably want to get staff to just comment on the idea. Go ahead, Councillor Cassidy, then Councillor Hopkins. Councillor Morgan, you want to? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's just like items 15 and 16, where the items we're talking about salt, winter salt, and the winter maintenance strategy. It's kind of weird to talk about hockey when it's such a beautiful day. It is fall, but it felt almost summer-like today. So beautiful day, but we're talking about road hockey, and I'm glad the councillor brought this up, especially again, it's timely, it's October, it's the In Motion Challenge is going on. We're trying to get people moving, and as a mother of 3, I know how difficult it is to get my kids moving. They've got bikes and skateboards and rollerblades and all of that, but they also have video games, so it's challenging. So if we can do as much as possible to encourage kids to go outside and play in an unstructured way without having to be driven all over the city to their various appointments and all of that, and over-program them to death. I love the idea of just allowing kids to go outside and play in as safe a manner as possible. So thanks, Councillor. Through you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Hopkins, then Councillor Morgan.
Yes, thank you. And just a quick question to staff. Does our bylaw allow street hockey?
Thank you through the chair. The letter that was received from the minister related to this and use the example of the City of Toronto. And I'm going to take some time here. In the City of Toronto, their bylaws are very prescriptive. So in the city, it's actually had the wording a ban on road hockey with the City of Toronto. Our streets bylaw covers off a number of things, including obstructing, encumbering, injuring the street. So no person shall lawfully obstruct the street itself. It talks about the issue related to public nuisance in the street, and it talks to the use of the roadways for public travel and not interfering with the public use of the street itself. Our bylaws are not prescriptive like Toronto's. It doesn't say we ban hockey. It says that you shall not obstruct the street itself. So this, once we got this, staff in compliance, staff in my area and roads, we all looked at this, and if you strictly interpret our bylaw to the strictest manner, you could say the street hockey would be prohibited. What I can tell you is that we have never banned street hockey. It's never been enforced. It's not an issue in the City of London itself. So when we look at the request before us, my recommendation back to you is that there really isn't a need to change our bylaw. Our bylaw can be interpreted in different manners. We've never enforced the playing of hockey on our streets ourselves. So our bylaw tends to be a lot more general in nature. And I would say to you that even if it was prescriptive like Toronto's, something like street hockey, by the time you get a call in the City Hall to get someone out there to enforce kids playing, I'm pretty sure the kids would be off the roadway themselves. So I would say this really isn't an issue. We obviously encourage street hockey from many different ways, as the councillor has indicated, from an active sort of perspective. And at this point, we really don't see a need to change our bylaw, but that's subject to your approval.
Okay, Mr. Braun wants to jump in. Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Solder is quite correct. You know, having been actively involved in many street hockey games in my past, I can tell you when someone yells car, you get off the road, and that's the way it works. But quite simply put, there's one occasion that I am aware of where we did have to visit a family, and that was because they had left their basketball net on the road. And it stayed on the road, and we just kindly asked them to move it, and that was the extent of it. But I do believe that, as Edward does, that our obstruction issues that covered under that particular bylaw are sufficient at this point in time. I don't see any need to change it to enable an activity specifically. When there's other activities, they'll be following right in behind anyway. So I think that if we were to leave it, we'd be best off. Thanks.
Councillor Morgan.
If I can just...
Oh, Councillor Hopkins, go ahead, sorry.
Sorry, if I could just follow up with that. Thank you very much for that explanation. And I want to thank the councillor for bringing this forward, because I think it's an important conversation that we have with our community, the importance of kids being outside and playing safe, of course. And I just would like to add, having 3 boys, and I was at my son's wedding last year, and his best man spoke to Mrs. Hopkins, who he recalls always telling me to go outside and play when I was over visiting. So I was very proud to have that reputation of encouraging kids to get outside and play. So definitely would support promoting kids outside and playing. And thank you, Councillor Van Holst.
I've got Councillor Morgan, and then it looks like Councillor Van Holst.
Well, I more had baseball on my mind today than hockey, so I'll try to be brief. Not that I'll be 3 hours, but so I understand the point of this one, and this is one of those ones that's really tricky for me because I really support the idea. Like the kids play on my street all the time. They play hockey, they play basketball, they play things I'm not even really sure what to call them, but they're games and sports, and part of my concern with us providing this direction is that we've heard a couple of things. One, that our bylaw doesn't actually restrict or ban hockey or basketball or other activities that we want to encourage on our streets. And 2, with the rare exception of, you know, what Mr. Brahm has said, where a basketball net had to be moved off the street, we've never stopped someone from playing sports on our streets. And so my worry is that, although the intent of this is great, that we're going to get into this like convoluted what streets and what cul-de-sacs are going to have road hockey, and then if we get into that, like which ones are not, and we may be actually more restrictive than otherwise, because we don't want people to play on Wonderland Road, right? So we're obviously going to get into, if we get into a bylaw direction on this, into like making those parameters, and it's going to be exceptionally complex. And I've heard from our staff that this is not allowed. People can play on the street within reason. They can play hockey, they can play basketball. So my preference would be for us to leave it as is and focus on encouraging people to participate actively. And if that means the councillor wants to bring a motion of some kind, and the clerks would probably have to advise on this, to encourage ourselves to be an active city, to play, you know, on our streets and to engage with each other and declare ourselves a road hockey friendly city or a, you know, sports friendly city, roll that into the In Motion program in some way. That's probably more appropriate, more impactful than us trying to amend the bylaw for one specific sport in the way that this, you know, request is written. So I don't want to vote against road hockey. And I don't think that I am by not supporting this. And I would be supportive of some other way for us to express that without having to have our staff spend a bunch of time trying to figure out how to parcel this into a bylaw that makes sense and isn't overly restrictive or has unintended consequences, not of not being Canadian, but maybe providing restrictions where otherwise there wouldn't be on people actively using our streets for physical fitness. So I'm sorry to be the person who, you know, isn't jumping on board with this. I'm certainly supportive, but I don't want to review the bylaw if that's what we're going to do.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the councillor's words. It seems to me that this issue has been cleared up, and we were really just looking for that clarification. So perhaps, rather than what has been expressed here, we ask staff simply to respond to the minister's request and thank him and say that we are also in support here in London of children playing street hockey and adults as well. So perhaps a motion like that is could be created and then, all right, thank you.
While the clerks are working up some language to that effect, I think directing Civic Administration, I see Councillor Usher would like to weigh in. Why don't you go ahead?
Just want to make 2 points. First of all, I think that letter should go from the mayor because this letter is to councillors. So just a thought. And secondly, I have seen street hockey, I've seen basketball. They played a lot in my neighborhood. I checked it out recently after I heard that this letter was coming, after we received the minister's letter. And everybody who I spoke to were of the opinion that they're allowed to. The only concern that everybody had was how do they make it safer, both for the drivers and the players. So some of them put up a little sign and says, would you kindly take a detour? In other words, go around, because most of the time it's on crescents. Or what happened is that sometimes it's a one-way dead end, and therefore they have to interrupt the game. But those are little things in comparison to the privilege of being in motion, as one of us talked about. So I think the direction that we're taking, I think it's a good discussion because it brought to light that it's, as one of my colleagues said, it's not allowed, and I like that. Too negative, make it positive. But I just think, number one, that we should send a letter from the mayor, and number two, if you're asked about it, maybe we should just suggest that people put up a little sign for safety and so on. But I've never seen any problems with it so far, so I'm glad the discussion is taking place. Thanks.
Councillor Van Holst.
Yes, well, I welcome the councillor's suggestion. I think it's very appropriate.
Aren't we a collegial bunch? For myself, I'd just say I think it's great that, the councillor is asking for a report back. Essentially, our staff are reporting back immediately in the meeting that he's asking about the request, which is there's no measures we need to really take to allow it, and it's fine. People use their common sense to play road hockey in streets that don't have a lot of cars normally because it's really annoying to move the nets around. So they pick streets that don't have a lot of traffic. And when we have great things like the road hockey tournament downtown, we block off the streets and we say, hey, all these streets are closed, no cars, it's road hockey time. And I think, that's the balance that we've got in the city where people are able to figure it out. We don't have a whole lot of road hockey games breaking out on Richmond Street, although we might have a few parties that are interfering with the roadway sometimes, obviously in violation of the streets bylaw. But I think that it's great the councillor brought it forward. I think it's good the minister is raising it, because sometimes municipalities do have these very restrictive approaches that prohibit people from doing things that are good. And I'm glad that that's not the case here. I think sending a letter from the mayor is a great idea. That'll teach the mayor not to leave the Civic Works Committee too early, then we start telling him to write letters, eh? Councillor Van Holst, would you like to move that? Any further discussion on the topic of letting kids play road hockey? Okay.
Just that looks like we need to close a parenthesis.
That'll be added later on, yeah.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed, 5-0.
That brings us to the deferred matters list. Any questions or comments on that, colleagues? Councillor Van Holst.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I had a question on item number 11. And perhaps I would ask through you to Mr. Brahm. This was a request, I believe, came up by Councillor Ridley, wondering if this one, its potential savings and consulting costs, Civic Administration review and report back on areas that the City of London could realize consulting cost decreases for capital projects through the addition of new staff rather than contracting out those consulting services so that we receive a net savings. And this was a request made back in June 2nd, 2015, but it doesn't look like we're going to get an answer until the third quarter of 2017, which 2 years to answer a question like that seems like a long time. At the time, I expected that we perhaps hear back in a few months. So perhaps our outgoing engineer, Mr. Baum, could just tell us where we're at in that, or maybe give us a few suggestions of what we might do in the meantime.
Sure, we had a related discussion earlier today. Mr. Brown.
Yes, thank you through the chair, and that related question will be in some ways repeated because it is initially this issue was brought up as you mentioned by Councillor Ridley in terms of savings that could be there in terms of the consulting fees that we are currently incurring on most of our project costs. It was determined through a PwC audit that we could, or we had the potential to undertake works at much less cost from an engineering perspective if we were to do so in-house. Subsequent to those studies and the brief study by PwC and the request by Councillor Ridley, there has been a number of undertakings that we've been employed with. One of them, which was the shift. So initially, we expected that we would be hiring a significant number of employees through the shift program, and that following the shift program, that those employees would be, through further analysis, would be either retained as those that would be undertaking the renewal-based construction engineering projects. That's where we expected that there would be the best savings for the city in undertaking those particular projects. So subsequent to that, though, tonight you've seen a huge array of projects that to the tune of 20% increases to our capital expenditure programs, which will also require a significant number of staff and resources to undertake. So this is very preliminary at this stage, and obviously Ms. Schurer will have to confirm and move this forward. But basically, we will be looking at the hiring of additional resources to help us through this 10-year program now that the federal and provincial governments are helping us with, where we'll see additional engineering requirements. We'll also have shift. So I think that the time to look at utilizing staff would follow those time periods. It's going to be a significant effort on our part just to manage the additional 20% with the resources needed to do just that in terms of the overall expenditure. So getting to the detail about when we're going to see this report, I believe that you know, we'd like to see what we actually undertake as uptake, so to speak, from the federal and provincial side through the wastewater and water program and through the transit program before we actually develop the plan as to how we're going to move forward with undertaking the engineering services for, you know, to replace some of the consulting services that we've traditionally used. So in other words, our plate will be very full in the next little while. So we'd prefer to potentially wait till we start to see some of these projects fall in line, do the hiring that we need to manage those projects, and then and if there's a horizon that seems apparent with respect to that, integrate those resources into the development of consulting services on an ongoing basis for the city for those renewal projects. If that makes sense to you, we'll proceed along that line, and with the help of the directors, and Ms. Schurer will generate a report, I think in December. Probably, yeah, by year end. That's also the time frame that we'll have a better awareness as to the projects that we'll be undertaking as well.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And can some of our new engineering graduates look forward to some openings here at the city?
Certainly, that is, traditionally, we have used the EIT program here at London as a succession plan for any of our engineers as they move through the ranks and become permanent employees under a full professional engineering status. So we expect to probably enhance that program and move forward with the hiring of additional staff and resources to manage these projects too in the short term.
Well, that's great that we've also got an opportunity to retain some talent in the city.
Any other questions about any of the items on the deferred matters list? Councillor Usher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I looked at the list and I was a little concerned about the number of items that we still have for the fourth quarter of 2016. And I didn't try to measure the amount of workload. I was just looking at the contents. And I sure hope that our staff is aware of that. They may want to look at this, and maybe some of them could be extended if it's too much work for, because this is the beginning of the fourth quarter already. That's one statement. And I wanted to ask a question, Mr. Chair, with respect to item, I lost it. Jeez, I had item number 17 first. Option of collecting diversion of Christmas trees. It says that this will come in the second quarter of 2017, but we are talking about the Christmas trees that will be used at the end of 2016. So is this not something that should come to us, or it has already come to us and we're going to monitor it after the Christmas trees are deposited or after the bylaw comes into place? Can I get a little explanation on that?
Yeah, the deferred matter is the report back.
So it's only the reporting back. We've already decided that we're going to have that.
Yeah, the first part of that resolution is about the one-year pilot project starting January 7th, 2017. And then the second part is the part that's really deferred, which is the report back on the results of the pilot.
Okay. And in, did I say 15 or 17 just now? Because it's both of them that I wanted to talk about. That was 15 that I just talked about. So now I'd like to go to 17. And we're talking about the proposed by law to reduce from 4 to 3. I thought we had done that already. I thought the bylaw was there already, but it's just to put it in place. In fact, I thought that we started that way back at the beginning of October. So can you help me understand why this is not completed?
Yep. So it's a phased approach. We passed the direction back in June, and we directed staff to come forward with the bylaw. The actual limits on the bags don't come into effect. We're not gonna start dinging people on the bylaw side until January. So we're promoting the fact that it's going down to 3. We're hoping people will put that down to 3, but we're not gonna actually change the bylaw until January.
So it's just the charges, like, it's in place from the 1st of October, right? Until then, but then people will be penalized beginning the 1st of, okay, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
No problem. And to our staff, just ignore what Councillor Usher said about pushing things off into next year. 15 out of 22 coming off the list sounds like a great idea. The list is up to 70 items and we only have 22 on the list, so I think we made good progress so far. I'm not sure all the committees are keeping up, frankly. But we're doing well at Civic Works. Any other questions on deferred matters? No? Okay, let's have a motion to receive that.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed, 5-0.
Okay, that brings us to additional business, and I wonder if there is any. I don't see any. No, I don't, no. It's a Blue Jays game, oh, sorry. Councillor Morgan, and then, okay, Councillor Morgan, go ahead.
So I won't take long, and I apologize to the committee when I said I don't remember my question before. I remember it now. It doesn't change my vote. It's more of a comment, and I appreciated that I met with Mr. Soldo this afternoon, and he answered most of my questions, and I was filtering through what was answered, what wasn't on the report. It was with reference to the overnight, or with the parking at the end of your driveway, and one of the challenges in my ward is people do that a lot, and they don't realize that under our new overnight parking bylaw, they can park right there, right? Just one step out. And I'm wondering, as we move towards enforcement, and I'll leave this as a comment, perhaps as we come across vehicles that are doing this, we could inform them of the new procedures by, dropping some information off with the citation if they get cited or warning or whatever ends up happening by our enforcement crew, to let them know that, hey, did you know you could just register online and actually park on the street for 15 days with that vehicle? And most people have 3. That's why they're parking on the street that way. And so they probably could get 45 days or so out of it, which should usually cover the period that they're trying to park for. So I'm wondering if, and I'll leave it with staff, that's something that we can consider as we move through enforcing this particular item, is to let people know about that piece that was commented on in the report. And that's the new options for overnight parking and just going online and getting a permit.
Thanks, through the chair. It's an issue that we need to elaborate on, because you're absolutely correct. We will likely end up with some non-compliances, when people are parking their driveway without any sort of a permit. So, we'll take it upon ourselves to discuss it with the bylaw enforcement folks, and also perhaps to add it into, the web information that's currently available, so that people are aware that parking in that manner at the end of your driveway is not an accommodation that we'll be dealing with through the overnight parking. So we'll deal with it in that sense then.
Okay, we've got one item, C1, which we need to go into closed session for. The reason is on the added agenda. It says a matter pertaining to advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose, and litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or local board. I wonder, colleagues, if someone would like to make a motion for us to go into closed session. I believe we're going to committee room 3. Mm-hmm. Yes, committee room 3. Okay, it's coming up on the screen.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed, 5-0.
So we're headed to committee room 3. I suspect since we've done additional business already that we'll just adjourn the meeting once we finish the closed session in committee room 3. So if there's any media wanting to know when we're actually done, we'll open the door and pop our head out and saying we're back in public session, but it'll be in committee room 3.